Hey Ben, thanks for joining me today. Do you want to
No problem, Matt.
introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. I'm Ben. I've been AJATting since late 2015, just a little over 2 years. I first got into Japanese. It was kind of just it just came to me. I for some reason just wanted to learn Japanese when I was in high school sophomore year. It was early 2014, and I don't know why, but I just wanted to. I'd been into a lot of things before, like I hadn't really been into language learning at all. I'd just been into things like Pokemon and stuff like that. And one day someone in school talked about it, and I just thought, that sounds like a really cool idea. So why don't I just learn Japanese? And so I went online. I searched things up on YouTube, just like tips on how to learn Japanese. Then I went on to a lot of those videos of people who were giving advice. There's one by like all Japanese, not what was it? It was Japanese Pod 101 or something like that. And it was just like one of those things that had a lot of, it just had like set phrases and whatever. And when I didn't really know anything when I first started, so I thought, yeah, this is pretty cool. I just try to remember that. And after a while, I ran out of things to look at. I didn't really know where to go, so I just looked at the writing systems and stuff like that. And I learned hiragana and katakana first, and I didn't know what to do after that. I just learned it, and I don't think the strokes were right or anything, but I just went for it. And then after that, I didn't know what to do, so I started looking around, and I found this one video on YouTube. It was by Tikyo Sam. It was like how to learn. Yeah, it was like how to learn 2,000 kanji or something in only 2 months, because I knew there was a third system. I didn't really know anything about it, so I watched that video and.
So you like really knew nothing about Japanese.
Yeah, I mean, I knew there was a third system. I knew it was the most difficult, but I didn't know how to learn it, right? I learned hiragana and katakana, but I didn't know how to tackle kanji. So I went online, I typed things in, and it was I was one of those people who was kind of intimidated by it too. I didn't really know where to start. So I saw that, and that's where I first got insight into AJATT, because he mentioned it in the video. He says, okay, go check out alljapaneseallthetime.com. And something like that. And then he would talk about RTK. He talked about using like surusu.com or whatever, Katz's SRS, and
Yeah.
and he like gave some examples, and I was like, okay, so I'll try this. I still didn't know what the Hasig was all about. I didn't really know about the story process. I just saw him putting them in, and he talked about doing 35 day. I'm like, okay, so this is pretty cool. So I tried doing that, and I still didn't know what to do. But then and then I stopped doing it. I stopped using surusu.com because it was kind of a mess, and I didn't really know like where anything was, and
Yeah, no, that website is a total mess.
yeah, and I didn't know where anything was, or like, how to actually write down the kanji, or like, how to actually get the kanji to stick in my mind. So eventually I just stopped, but I was still interested. I didn't want to stop, learning the kanji. So I kept looking, and I found another video by Abroad in Japan or whatever, saying like how to learn kanji the fun way or something. And it was the same book. And after that, and that's really where I figured out how you were supposed to actually set up the stories and how you were actually supposed to use the method. And then I checked out like people who reviewed it, and I found Patrick's video, like how I finished remembering the kanji, like how to / how I immersed. It's not there anymore, but
Yeah,
I saw
no,
that.
his good
Yeah.
old video.
Yeah, it was like, and it was really inspiring to me because he was really young in the video. And I mean, I was pretty young when I first started. I was only like 16. So I'm like, okay, this looks pretty cool. And then I saw Anki and stuff, and that's when I just looked into it. I found out about like spaced repetition and stuff like that. And then I found out about how I was supposed to just like, add the cards in and then do the kanji and stuff like that. So that's those two videos. I found out about Anki through Patrick's video, and then I found out about like how to actually do RTK correctly and and just get creative with it with Abroad in Japan's video. And so I did that. I got the book online. I got like a PDF, and I went onto the shared decks, and I got a deck that was just pre-made for the kanji. But, but I wrote my own stories. So I started doing that. It was May 2014 at this point, so May 13th, 2014. And so I had a plan to finish them all. I kind of started it. I was just like, okay, let's give this a little test run, see if it actually works. I was really skeptical about RTK. So I tried it for the first 2 days. I found out that I was really actually remembering all the kanji. So I'm like, okay, I'll just do this. I'll just go all out and finish the book. So I planned on doing 20 a day every day until I was done, and I did.
Damn.
So
so what were your cards like? Did you had the keyword on the front and the kanji on the back?
and yeah, so I mean, I think everything must have lined up because the book, not the book, the deck that I had only had the card on the keyword on the front, and then it even had the stroke diagram on the back. And it had someone else's story, but I wrote my own stories on notebook paper. I didn't actually put it on the card, and I would actually, yeah, I'll get into more detail on that too. I actually illustrated like full pictures and stuff like that for all the stories.
Damn.
And so yeah, I think I told you about this a long time ago. I don't know if you remember, but
yeah, I don't remember.
but yeah, so I figured there were 2042 in the one I did. I know there's a newer version with 2200, but I did the older one where, like, you know, there weren't the new kanji added in yet. And so I was like, okay, there are 2042. I need to get this done. So I'll do 20 a day for the first 100 days. I'll do 21 the last 2 days so I can just get it done evenly. So I did. And I mean, it was kind of hard. It was really, yeah, I mean, at some point, I remember halfway through, I'm like, you know, I've got 1200. I've got like 1000 to go. I'm like, oh my God, I'm still so far away from finishing. But that only happened like once or twice, and I finished it because it was really exciting. You know, when I first started, it was the first time I'd ever done anything like this, and I mean, I didn't really think it was possible to learn 2000 kanji in 3 months or so. So that's really what kept me going. When I found out how unique this was, I'm like, yeah, this is really cool.
And how long were you spending on kanji each day, especially if you were drawing out each story that you made?
I mean, the first few days when the kanji, I mean, you remember how the kanji were like really easy in the beginning? Yeah. So, but then like in the beginning, it would be like less than an hour, and that would include doing all the reps and stuff. Mm-hmm. But later I mean, I'm not even kidding. Later, I would spend like the whole afternoon doing the 20 kanji because I would write the story. There were words in the book that I wouldn't actually know, like English words that like the keywords I wouldn't even know in English. I'd have to look them up, like write down the definition. And, you know, and I also did some stuff that I'll talk about later with like, just making it more personal. And I would draw like full-fledged pictures and all that stuff. And, make sure that the story I wrote actually worked. I would try it out a few times and then do the reps and stuff. So, I mean, it really, kind of just varied from an hour to like 5 hours and something like that.
Damn. So you were extremely motivated for someone with no true direction in their Japanese learning.
Yeah, because I mean, I've heard all these things. So I'd heard all these things about how hard kanji was. And I was like, wait a second. There's something to make this. It's like, it's not as hard as I thought. And a lot of people say they spend years and they only know like 1,000. I'm like, this is pretty cool then. I'm like, maybe I came across something that not too many people know about. And then, so I started doing that, and I think, yeah, it was just really interesting because I'd never done anything like that in my life before. I was just kind of in limbo. I didn't really know what to do with my life. I was 16. I'm like, okay. And I come across this and I'm like, this sounds really interesting. So this is not even about AJATT at the time. I didn't know too much about it, but this was just because I wanted to learn Japanese. And then after that, I was just about to go back to school. I was a junior at this point. And after I finished RTK, I went through Genki or whatever, and this was kind of a big mistake. I went through I went through this typical, textbook learning phase where I thought that's how I was going to do it. I downloaded like a pre-made deck to go along with it. I would just do all the exercises, everything, make sure I got everything 100% correct. I went through it for like multiple hours a day. I would do all my Anki reps.
So it sounds like you have insane grinding power. That's what I'm getting so far. In general.
Well, because I didn't know how this worked. I didn't know how I was supposed to do it.
Yeah, but I mean, you still were able to sit and work for hours each day on stuff that doesn't sound so fun. So that's a pretty insane ability, I would say.
Well, I mean, for RTK, that was because, I mean, it was really interesting to me. And I didn't know about AJATT, so there was nothing to really get. I wasn't tempted to start doing sentences or anything like that because I didn't know about it. That was one thing. But yeah, so I went through those. I thought, because I didn't know how to learn, so I thought this was how you would do it. I assumed that that's how everyone else learns, so I would just do it that way. So after doing that for like a whole year, I remember grinding in Anki for hours. I wasn't really sure about what to do. Okay, so then around near the end of my junior year is when I found this magical channel called Matt versus Japan. And
wait, so how long had you been grinding textbooks at that point?
So that was so I finished RTK in August, and then the day after I finished RTK, I started doing the textbooks. So how long would that be? That'd be around 7 months at that point. Yeah, I found your channel. You know, you only had like 60 subscribers. Then I found that. Yeah. And then I found, there was that one video you put up on how to make SRS cards or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was completely different from anything I'd seen. But I saw your videos. You really knew what you were doing. I'm like, well, what am I doing differently? Yeah, I don't know. And then you mentioned that again. The AJATT thing came up again. I'm like, oh, what is it with this method?
Wait, so how did you find my channel then? If you weren't already on the lookout for AJATT stuff.
I knew of AJATT, and I thought at some point, I knew who like Tikio Sam was, and I remember watching his interview with Katz or whatever on AJATT. So I'm like, okay, I found it, and I remember hearing about AJATT through his videos. So I'm like, you know, this looks familiar. I'll check it out. And then I think it was related to that. It was related to it.
Oh, like
and I
one
saw
of the videos on the side.
Yeah. And I clicked on it. I was going all over the place. This was in the library at school. I found that out. And I mean, before that, Patrick's video, he talked about AJATT, and then you were doing AJATT. I'm like, okay, so.
Yeah, it sounds like you always had this strange connection ever since the very beginning, even though you never really got it for the first while.
Yeah, I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew of its existence.
There was some weird
calling.
It was always in the corner.
Yeah, so then I found that out, and yeah, and like you were mentioning it, everyone who seemed to be really getting pretty good mentioned it. So I'm like, okay, maybe this is what I need to be doing. So then after I finished my junior year in high school, I was just in the summer again. Everything was great. I didn't have to do any work anymore. I was just on summer. I could finally just get up at 6:30 in the morning and not be tired. I was still studying with Genki and stuff. I still didn't know what to do. After like enough times of like asking you questions, you just gave me an invite. You were like, if you want to just add me on Skype, whatever, you know, you can tell me what's been going on. And that's pretty much where like I found out about it. And that's where I ended up reading the website and reading Anti-Moon and Table of Contents.
I remember at that point, that was when I hadn't really received that much feedback from my videos or anything yet. And I was really excited to like get more people doing AJATT and stuff and like share what I had learned. Yeah, I was like excited to talk to you, and I remember we Skyped and you showed me your Anki deck, and I was just blown away because you had like 50,000 different pre-made decks. It was just a mess. And like when you opened up Anki, you know how on the left side it has like all the different lists of like, first it has your decks and then your card formats and then your tags. And you had like 50,000 different card formats. Was just showed me that, like
types.
Yeah, they were all like from each pre-made deck you had a different deck or card type. And I remember I asked you, and you said like you were spending like 6 hours a day just doing reps. And I was like, holy shit, this guy, like I was like, this guy has potential because he has serious grinding capacity. So if I could just like tweak him to the right direction. And this was, I remember, I just told you, I'm like, just read the AJATT site, like stop everything and read like literally every article on the table of contents and then read Anti-Moon. And then you actually did it. And then after that, you just got it. It was the craziest thing because I didn't actually think it was going to work. Like, I didn't think you were actually going to do what I said for whatever reason. I guess I was just used to people being stubborn, but you just took my advice and you're like, okay, and you would like update me like, yep, I'm just sitting here reading the table of contents all day, and like I just on this article, I just like realized this and this, and I was like, damn, this guy's like actually might get somewhere.
Yeah, and you were like, LOL, take notes or something like that. Yeah, I remember. Yeah. So
you were the best student ever.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't actually, I didn't totally get everything on that website because some of the stuff that he says on there, I feel like you really get after you've been through the same thing at some point. Some of the stuff on there, just reading it, I didn't totally get it. And then later I would actually have the experience he was talking about. And then I'd be like, oh, that's what he meant. Yeah. I remember. Yeah, so that's how I got into AJATT. And, well, before I started AJATT, again, I think, I did like one grammar guide. I did take him's grammar guide or whatever, like just to get myself just some basic tools and whatever, just to get broken into it. Because at that point, it's kind of crazy. I'd been studying for like a whole year, but I still didn't get some of those basic things. I remember, because I was trying to understand all this anime and stuff, and I couldn't do it. I'm like, why am I not understanding more than 5% after a whole year of doing this? So then, yeah, I sat down and I just did the cards. That took a while. I mean, Take Him had like, I don't know how many cards I made for that, but there were like 1,000 or so in there. I tried to like do as quickly as possible, and I'm lucky that I was in high school at the time, because it was just so much easier to get it done. It took a while, and it was kind of boring because at that point it wasn't anything, it wasn't really personal yet. after that is when I really started getting into it. I remember I was really excited to get into it after I finished Take Hymns, because I could finally just get into native material and actually do stuff that I wanted to. After that, I don't remember this was summer, but I hadn't actually started really getting it until after all this application stuff had been taken care of. So it was around like November at that point. So I remember at that point I was sitting down, I would, just keep the same daily schedule, pretty much every day. I would just go to school. At that point, I had some animes I really liked or whatever. I'd just be listening to them. I'd go to school. I would just try to get through the day without getting caught walking around the hallways with it and stuff. And I'd come home every day, and then I would always read for 2 hours, and then I would always watch 4 episodes of anime or something after that. Every single day, the same schedule. And then whatever I found, I would add in. And around that time, I found that show called Shokugeki no Soma or whatever. I really got into that. I thought it was really funny and stuff, and that was a really good show. So that's when I really started getting into the card making. At that point, I hadn't really been making too many sentences. I just couldn't get myself to do it. But then after that, I started reading it, and then I started just taking those sentences and making cards for them.
Out of the manga?
Out of the manga. So, I watched the show first, and then and then I went back to read the manga. That's kind of I think that happened to me a lot. I would get into the manga through the show. I would do that, and I did that for a month. I started adding 20 a day. So I was up to 600 after a month of doing AJATT for real.
And this was bilingual cards?
Yeah, these were all bilingual. And at this point, I was also making some mistakes. I'll talk about that later, just adding whatever I could find. And some of them just weren't I+1 sentences or whatever. But I'd just be adding them like crazy, just trying to learn anything I could from it. And so after a month of this, around Christmas time is when I actually started going monolingual. I think at the time I had 600 to 700 cards only. And that was probably the biggest challenge. One of the biggest challenges I had throughout this whole thing was just doing the monolingual sentences, because when I first started, there were so many things in the dictionary. I had to make cards for every word that I found in the dictionary also. So I was making extra cards just from looking some words up. It took me 3 hours to make less than 10 cards monolingually. And I would also have to add that extra stuff from the dictionary. So I was totaling at least 20 cards a day or something.
And so when you were doing that, were you using my strategy where for the words you didn't know in the definitions, you're using English you're making bilingual cards for those, or was it all recursive?
I was doing what you did, because at that point, that's when you also put up that video.
Yeah.
I remember when I first started, you put up how to make the transition. I always intended on doing it that way. So I think the reason I got through is because of that video, because that's exactly what I did. I would go onto that website called yode.jp, and I would just try to get some sentences for those. And that website was, in the beginning was just a nightmare to get through. It, depending on how much or how little you understood, you could be on there, or, depending on which ones came up, you could be on there for 5 minutes to half an hour trying to find a sentence.
So you're just going page by page by page trying to find one that was I+1.
Yeah. I was burning my eyeballs in the screen. I was up at 2:30 in the morning doing it. I remember. Yeah, so those took longer than the actual cards just to find all of them. I don't remember how long I did this for. I think I stopped. I can check right now, because there's this big drop in cards added after that, on Anki stats, and I can kind of tell based on that when I stopped, having to look up so many words. But I think it took 3 months to finally stop looking up words in the dictionary and just go straight up monolingual. It's somewhere around 3 months of doing that.
Okay, so that sounds pretty reasonable. And then, were you looking stuff up outside of your card making, when you were just reading and watching stuff?
I would be occasionally.
And did you use when you were in the middle of the transition, would you just use the Japanese to English dictionary for that, or would you actually try to go J to J?
I think I would go. I was trying to go J to J after I had started that, but when I first started, before I made the transition, I would be using this app called, what was it called? It was JET or something like that. It's for the Android. It just you can look up the word, and when you type in the reading, all sorts of possibilities pop up. It was really useful. I would use that before, but I wouldn't really use it after.
Okay, so in the middle of the transition, you started when you were in the wild, you would use a monolingual dictionary?
Occasionally, but I wouldn't look up every word I saw, because at that point I was still trying to just get to a reasonable point. So I didn't want to waste too much time looking everything up.
And what dictionary were you using?
Well, I was using Colbury, so just all the ones.
Okay. So you had the whole collection from the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
cool.
installed that. I think I actually talked to you and had you help me install it. Yeah, like before I started, and kind of got some tips from you from
Cool.
that.
And
So I used like
do you think it helped having all the different dictionaries?
it still helps me now because sometimes there's like a better definition in there. You know, like if you don't understand one, you still have like 5 other ones to try.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, and then like at the very bottom, there's this English thing I'd be using in the middle of it because sometimes they have like little examples at the bottom or whatever. Yeah. I try to look at those if I could. What after that? So I mean, by the time I finally stopped, I think I had like 2,200 sentences at that point. Not too many, but I still had trouble understanding some things, but I was getting better pretty quickly. So then at that point, I'd just be going to school. There came a point where I actually like ended up going to sleep at like 2 o'clock one time, but I went to sleep at like 12:30 on average every night. I'd have to get up at 6. So I was like sleeping in school, and
this was because you were staying up late studying Japanese?
Yeah. And I would also like I just wouldn't pay attention in class, and I actually came up with some lame excuses in class to like listen to Japanese. I remember one time in the stat class, my teacher was just like, okay, lose the earphone. I don't know what you're doing with that earphone. And I'm like, oh, actually, I'm not listening to anything. I just have this habit where it just sticks out of my ear. And they're like, oh, okay, whatever. And then so then for the rest of the year, I just had it in, and he didn't question it at all. And then one of my teachers at the end of the year, she didn't even care. I took the test with the earphones in. I was like taking the like calculus test with it in. I'm like, yeah, that's just, you care so much about your students, man. I could be cheating for all you know. But I mean, it wasn't. I was just listening to Japanese. But
wait, so were you actually keeping up with schoolwork?
Yeah, I was. I was still like getting it done. But I mean, at that point, I'd senioritis and no one cared anymore because I was a senior at this point. So I mean, like that half of the year was great because there was hardly any work, and I mean, the stuff that they did assign was not that hard. So you could just get through it pretty quickly.
Nice.
And then yeah. So, and I also lost credit for one of the classes, but I'm not going to get into that. I actually ended up like, it wasn't necessary. And it was like, I had to do like an 8-page paper in June or something like that. I'm like, I'm not doing this at this point. So I just didn't do it and ended up losing credit for the class, but it didn't really matter anyway. And, it didn't drop me very much at all. And I would also be sitting in class and like, I'd download some subtitle files and like on my phone I'd be listening to the anime in class, and then I'd be like trying to read along with it and email the sentence myself and stuff like that. Yeah, and I remember I was doing this all the time, and I don't know, at that point I didn't really have a social life. I didn't really talk to anyone outside. But
cool. So that's just, did that bother you, or you just like AJATT all Japanese all the time?
Not at all. I mean, I became like so introverted that after I found this out, I didn't really feel the need. I'm like, why would I hang around with you guys when I could just do this?
Did you kind of have that positive feedback loop going of you'd study and then you'd get better and then you'd be motivated to study more? And
yeah, I would see it. And I think the funnest time for me was when I first started doing the monolingual thing, because I was learning so much from it. You know what I mean? Like when I first started switching to Japanese, I was like, I was at the point where I could learn so many words, and it didn't bother me because I knew I was getting better every time I was learning something. So like, even though it was a lot of work, it was really fun. And I saw myself like recognizing words that I just learned, and some of the words I learned from the dictionary I also heard somewhere else, and it just got really motivating. So
yeah, I really think that getting to that point right there is the key to getting good, because you get sucked into this loop where every bit of work you put in, you immediately see results coming back out of that. And so you just naturally want to keep putting in more and more, so you get more and more out of it. And then it's like motivation totally doesn't become even relevant because it's just all you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I got to the point where I was learning things just because I could learn something from it. Like, it was interesting. Like, some of the shows I was watching were fun just because I had a lot to learn from it. And I was finding myself not watching some shows that I wouldn't learn too much from because, I was just addicted to finding new things. Yeah, so I found fun in things that I could just get better from. And it didn't really matter what the subject was, like, to some extent.
Yeah.
After a while.
I think everyone should think like that even more, because people get caught up in the mindset, I think, because of the way Katsumoto talks, where, oh, I'm watching a show because I want to watch the show. It just happens to be in Japanese. Really, that's kind of nice, because then it's like, oh yeah, it's not work. You're just doing what you would do anyway. But in reality, if you think of it as a game, and the game is trying to get as good as possible, and so you're not watching a show because you like the plot, you're watching it because it's going to make you get good. it's actually more fun, in my opinion. Like, people think that would be the more stoic approach, but really that's the more fun approach, because then you're getting better faster, and getting better is actually what brings you the satisfaction, you know?
Yeah, definitely. It was around that time where, like, I don't know, we made that little group. We had a bunch of other people doing it, and that was also really motivating, you know, because we had a bunch of other people just,
this is really, really weird, because I hardly remember this. I was just talking to someone else about this the other day, but I made a line group for AJATTers a few years back, and this was because there was nowhere. Katsumoto had already totally disappeared, and my YouTube channel was still pretty small, and there was really no community for AJATTers anywhere. And it was always just me and Patrick, and I always kind of wanted a little bit more of a, like, community, because I was starting to, like, have all these cool insights and, like realizations about AJATT, but I had no one to like, give them to. And so I created this, I, like, found Ben, and Brit vs. Japan was in there too, and there was a bunch of other people. I hardly remember this now for some reason.
Yeah, so anyways, at the end of, I finally got finished with high school, and this was pretty quick. At this point, it had been 2 years since the kanji. I actually didn't even get into AJATT until a year and a half after I'd done the kanji. So I would just do it all summer. I remember at that point, I was, I'd gotten pretty good, but not that good, so I had plenty to learn. At that point, I actually started getting up. I had a crappy sleep schedule because of school, but I fixed it, and I started getting up at 4:30 every day and studying from 4:30 to 7:30 straight up. Just like
in the summer?
I don't know. Yeah, in the summer.
Damn.
Get up at 4:30 a.m. Just by the time my dad got up, my dad would get up pretty early too. He'd get up at like 6 o'clock. But by the time he was up, I'd already read for an hour or something like that, and I was already getting started with like watching stuff. And I would do it all day, and I would only get like 6.5 hours of sleep or something. But I didn't really care at that point because I don't know. It was just really fun. And I would just add a lot of sentence cards every day. A lot of the stuff I was reading at that point was too difficult. I would still be able to learn a lot from it.
So you mean like novels or what?
Yeah, I think the first time I ever read a light novel was in April 2016, which was the first time I got through one successfully. If we're talking about the first time I touched a light novel, it would be the first day I started AJATT, but I quit after like 2 days because it was mostly just nonsense. I couldn't understand it. Yeah, so like 5 months in is the first time I really actually kind of got through a light novel. I mean, it was tough still. It was really tough, but I like actually read it. I didn't like stop halfway or something like that. That would be when I started. And then like that summer, so a few months after that is when I started to actually kind of look at them. I would still be reading manga and stuff at that point, but eventually I slowly started wanting to read more novels and stuff because the manga, like again, as you mentioned before, you start to want to learn more. And when you start getting less from something you're reading, you look towards more difficult stuff. So at that point, I just started getting into novels and stuff. And it was really difficult, but I had a lot to learn from it, especially the words that would come up almost specifically in the novels. I had a lot to learn for those.
Yeah, so how was that transition to full raw novel text?
It was tough. There was a lot of stuff. I mean, I had to deal with comprehending like half of the page many times or even less than that because there'd be tons of things. And, sometimes the novels would have long sentences and it'd be really difficult to follow it. And sometimes this still happens occasionally. Like I had to read it more than once to get it. Like at that time.
How much were you looking up? Like every word you didn't know on the page or just as much as you needed to try to get the gist or?
I think anything I could, I would learn. Like anything I came across that I could learn, I would just take it and make a card for it.
So it was pretty intensive. Like you were just minding the shit out of what you were reading.
Yeah, because I had no choice. There's a ton of stuff in there that I just didn't know, so I had to look it all up. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a nightmare, but at the same time, it was like I had infinite amount of time because I hadn't yet gone, like I had just gone out of school and there was nothing else to do.
So then how long was it until you didn't have to look so much stuff up to comprehend the novels anymore?
I mean, it all depends on what kind of novel you're talking about, but like a general novel, around a year after that, I actually tried to read one. I realized I'm like, wow, I don't really have to look very much up at all anymore. I'd be looking up some words here and there, of course, because there were going to be words hanging out. I wouldn't really have to wonder like what the way of expression in the novels wouldn't be as confusing anymore. So less than a year later, I think, for that. But I mean, it wasn't like intensive the whole time. I just started learning things here and there, and eventually I think it just added up.
Cool.
Yeah, okay, so then I'll just try to get through this next part a little bit quicker. It's pretty much the same thing throughout. Like my first year in college was a little bit of a nightmare. An awful room arrangement. So by the time I got to college, I had like 5,000 cards or something like that. I signed up late for housing, so I ended up getting this like really extroverted kid who would just invite people into my room. with no warning, and I just, I'd come back from a long day just ready to do some AJAT, and then he'd have like 4 of his friends over. I'm like, I didn't hear about this. And then he'd like forget how many times he would forget the people. He would like bring people over so many times he wouldn't even know who he already introduced to me and who he didn't. So it was like, I don't know. It was just really annoying. And actually, after a while, I just changed a room. I started sleeping downstairs and stuff. I started to hang out in the library to do AJAT. I'd stay there. Like, I pulled some all-nighters doing AJAT here because I had college work at this point, and it was really difficult, but I was still feeling, I was still like wanting to get better at Japanese on top of all this. So I would stack it all up on top. I'd end up having to stay up all night a few times just to get the cards done. I wouldn't go to sleep until I added all my sentences in. And I inverted my sleep schedule to the point where I was going to sleep at like 5 in the morning and getting up at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And it was awful. In college, like, it was a whole other game with AJAT because, there would be people everywhere. It'd be hard to find a place where I could just sit down and watch anime without, like having someone talk over me and, and stuff like that. So I ended up having to do it when everyone else was going to sleep. And I snuck down into the basement in one of the places, like in the residence hall I stayed in. I snuck into it's like a storage room and sat down on the floor to do it. It's pretty, I don't know. It's pretty.
Damn. Well, it sounds like you still never had any motivational issues.
Yeah, I mean, all I wanted to do at that point was I don't think I was ready to go to college at that point. All I wanted to do was just do AJAT. I had to end up going anyway, so I was like, okay, let's just find a way to make this work. I would just, go anywhere I could. At this point, I hadn't really been talking to people either. Again, I feel like this whole thing with AJAT is, you can't really make it work if if you're going to be talking to people all the time.
Yeah, it's a pretty isolated journey. It's a pretty lonely journey.
I mean, it's, this is actual serious stuff, and I found out after a while that you can't compromise with people past a certain point because you have to get the stuff done one way or another, and a lot of people, they don't understand why you're doing it. So, they're like, why can't you just skip it today? And I'm like, no, I can't. So that was basically the whole time I was in college. I was just doing the work I had to, and then I would just get all the sentences I had to do done. Pretty much like it was always the last thing I did because I didn't have like a good time management. I couldn't really get it to work very well. So I'd end up, just having a really awful sleep schedule. And, I just end up, barely passing some classes that I took. It wasn't really good, but
you somehow pulled through.
Yeah, I ended up getting through. I've never been in danger of like failing out in a class or something, but I didn't do too well because it wasn't my top priority in school. It's funny, right? I was going to school and school wasn't my top priority. Yeah. I was still doing AJAT at that point. Yeah, so then I finished my first year, and then I went, again, it was summertime, and my older sister was doing work. My parents didn't really like this. I don't really know how they felt about it. I just went home for those 4 months after I graduated. I mean, not graduated. I finished, my freshman year in college. I was just at home doing this again. And, that's pretty much all I did for that whole summer.
So did you get a lot better that summer?
I don't know. I think I finished the summer with around 9,000 cards, but I actually dropped and deleted 1,000 of them recently. I added a lot of bad cards along the way, and I ended up just realizing they were slowing me down, and it wasn't really worth it. So I got rid of a lot of them. But so the whole summer was pretty much just more AJAT. I came back to school, and this time I actually got a much better roommate.
That's really good.
Really close friend of mine since 6th grade, and he's also really introverted and stuff like that. So I've never had anyone in his room except for me and my roommate, and that worked out pretty well. And so it was a lot less stressful this semester because I didn't really have to worry about coming back and how I was going to fit it in. I could always just get it done here. Yeah, at this point I also I had some trouble adding some cards in because recently I've been looking up the words, but I've also been really bad with putting them in and stuff. So I'm slowly trying to fix that, but I've still been adding cards in and stuff. And right now I don't even have that many. I don't even think I broke 10,000 yet. It's pretty much it. So that's what happened up until this point. So
why don't you kind of try to give an explanation on where your ability's at right now? I know it's a pretty hard thing to do, but...
So as far as kanji goes, I guess I'll just start with the kanji. There's really, I still learn a few here and there, but, along the journey I've probably tacked on more than 1,000 on top of the original RTK ones. I don't know how many I can read, but I'd say probably over 3,000 kanji or so.
Did you actually make Anki cards for the kanji, or did you just learn them in sentences?
I learned them just in sentences. I also ended up doing RTK3 later, but I don't really think that was too worth it. because by the time I did it, I could already read a bunch of them. But yeah, I ended up just finding a lot of them from just sentences and stuff like that and adding them in.
Cool.
And so that's how I ended up going there. For understanding, let's say for listening, a lot of the stuff I watch, I can watch without a problem. I mean, that's kind of to be expected. It's been like 2 years now. I've been doing close to nothing but this. I've been listening as much as I can, but again, I stopped in my sleep recently because I can't fall asleep with the stuff on anymore. I used to be able to do it no problem, but I keep waking up if I listen to it now.
Yeah, I don't listen to my sleep either.
Yeah, but I usually just try to get it done. Like whenever I'm walking anywhere, whenever I'm just somewhere throughout the day, I just typically try to have that in. And so listening, has improved a lot because of that. Because I've been listening passively and actively. Yeah, so I'd say like as far as anime goes, a lot of it is not very difficult. I can read a lot of the things I want to as well. Depending on what genre, it can be difficult. It can definitely be difficult.
What kind of stuff do you struggle with listening and reading?
Some of those other novels that I used to read, like Fate Zero and stuff like that, that had a lot of things in there that I just wasn't used to. I think it was just the speech style and stuff. I really couldn't get through it too well. I haven't tried it recently. There were just some words in there that I didn't know, a lot of words in there I didn't know, and there were just, I think they were using some...
Yeah, no, the novel is... Yeah, the Fate Zero novel series uses a lot of really uncommon words.
Yeah, so that's like something where I'd have to look it up. I haven't gone through it recently, but I mean, when I first read it, I was still in high school, and that was really, really tough. I don't know how I do today, but I would assume that I'd still have some issues here and there with it. I'd probably have to look up some words here and there.
So what about with listening?
I mean, for the majority of things, again, it's not really that big of a problem when it comes to anime. I'm not really sure too much about the podcast stuff because I haven't really used that too much. There have been some shows where like this tech lecture, in this one show called like Mahoka Koko no Retose or whatever. And that one was kind of hard. A lot of it was like doable as far as the show goes, but there were some parts when they were talking about like the technology and stuff where, I'm just like I still haven't gotten to that point where it's just completely comprehensible, because I haven't really gotten enough exposure to some of that. But I think that part of it is just due to the fact that I haven't looked at certain genres for,
So the kind of stuff that you're comfortable with, though, like most anime, you can get to close to 99% comprehension.
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching some like the newer, like some of the more popular animes recently, like Naruto and stuff like that. And I mean, I can get through that without a problem. Like following the plot without any subtitles is no problem whatsoever. Stuff like that. And, like manga, I would assume is pretty easy. I feel like probably read almost all those because, it's even easier considering that it's all written down and you don't have to so at that point, I don't really read much manga anymore either. I haven't read a manga in almost a year because I'm just not that interested in reading it anymore.
And what about outputting?
And outputting, I mean, to some extent, I can go on like Skype and stuff and people are like impressed with me when I talk in Japanese. But again, I'm not too comfortable with saying anything I want in real time or something like that. I'm still improving in output. Like written wise, whenever I type stuff to people, I mean, I've never had a time where someone actually knew I was an American or something like that. Because when you write, you have more time.
Yeah. So you feel like you can output. It's just not as instantaneous yet. You need more practice to get it more on command.
Maybe it's because I always compare it to my English level. And of course, when it comes to English, I'm going to be much more advanced. I've only been doing this for about 2 years. So,
yeah,
versus like almost 20 years of English. So I always do that to make myself feel bad. So I try harder. I always look at like what I can do in my native language. So it's certainly not at that point. I've definitely gotten to the point where like some things I can certainly say without any kind of hesitation. There are things where, like you've seen and heard them so many times that it's just almost second nature. You can kind of just piece it together, it just comes out. But other things, I mean, I would have to think more intently and I'd have to have like a little bit more preparation to do that, and I also have to have a little bit more practice with it to get more comfortable with something specific. That's the idea here. Some things, explaining them, like you need to be a lot more precise with that, and I haven't practiced too much with outputting. I'm still in that point where I feel that I need to listen a little bit more. I need to get more input before I do that.
Yeah, so what are your like future plans regarding learning Japanese? Like what do you want to focus on?
In terms of what I want to focus on, I want to get to the point where nothing slows me down whatsoever. And I do want to get to the point where I'm actually really fluent at Japanese, like spoken-wise as well. Comprehending most things I look at is not really a problem when it comes to like, like media and stuff like that. But the conversational part is something I definitely would still like to improve on.
So do you plan on practicing outputting more in the near future?
I would probably think so because, again, I'm getting a lot more comfortable with input. So I believe that starting to output, it might not be as dangerous at this point. When you don't really know anything, at that point, you're obviously going to be making a lot of mistakes and stuff. But I wanted to minimize that, so I really was being careful this whole time, not to say anything I really didn't know. And there was one instance where I did say something that I wasn't completely sure about, and then I found out shortly after that the right way to say it. So that kind of, like raised a red flag and kind of had me reconsidering speaking too quickly.
Yeah, it can definitely be a tricky thing, but that's cool. So it sounds like you're moving towards the final stage of AJATT, where you're really just turning all this potential you've collected through tons of input and learning how to comprehend the input into actual speaking ability and
definitely
writing ability.
because the speaking ability, I mean, there's always going to be a gap as far as like passive and active knowledge goes. But I mean, it's pretty large with mine because I mean, I can understand a lot, but since I guess I just never practiced speaking because I guess I've always been discouraged to speak because I never, you don't really speak too early in AJATT. There's that saying, shut your mouth before you hurt yourself or whatever.
Yeah.
But so I've always been careful not to do that. But, maybe like it might be time to start getting more practice for that. Definitely.
Yeah. If there was one kind of downside of the AJATT approach, I would say it's tempting to just put off practicing outputting because, I mean, there is truth to the you could always say if I just do more input, my potential is going to be increased even greater. But there's no limit to how much you can increase your potential, and eventually you have to put in the work to turn the raw potential into actual ability. And it can be really tempting to push that off. I mean, I'm really guilty of that as well. I still feel like, there's so much I can learn just from listening. Why would I try to put my effort into speaking?
I think it's just a thing with AJATT is that a lot of people are just, and including me, sometimes I develop this fear of making mistakes, which is why it's kind of hard. It's tempting not to speak because, like maybe you're afraid you'll make a mistake or like something like that or set up a bad habit. And that kind of, that kind of made me hesitant to start speaking. That's definitely something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely important to always stay skeptical and to always be asking yourself the question, like, do I know this is correct? Could this possibly be wrong?
Yeah,
I guess that's a little different than actual just fear of like, oh no, what if I fuck up? I guess ideally you'd have that first one and not the second fear. So, do you have any advice for upcoming AJATTers or things that you wish you would have known or would have done differently?
Okay, so the first thing I'd probably talk about would be remembering the kanji, because I've actually helped a lot of people with this too, but I've never seen someone actually finish it. So, I'm being serious, I've never seen anyone finish remembering the kanji. I've started a lot of people, but no one actually makes it to the end. I would say, I don't know, just do the kanji right the first time. I'd say spend as much time as you need to getting that done, and don't get tempted to do anything else before. Don't get tempted to add your sentence in or something like that before you're done with the kanji, like halfway or something. Take however long you need to finish it. Usually, I think it's going to be around, 3 to 6 months if you actually do it seriously. I'd say also have a goal for that. Maybe like set a daily amount. It was really easy for me to stick to when I was in high school because I had so much time. Even then, try to have a daily amount. Like if you're going to do like maybe 15 a day or something, just stick to it. Make sure you have it done. Don't say, well, I can just skip it today and do 30 tomorrow or something like that. Find some number that works for you and try to get it done every day until you're finished. When it comes to the stories, I think you've already talked about this a lot. Just make sure there's nothing but the keyword on the front. So you have to actually write the kanji out by hand. I would also get some of that graph paper. And so I would practice writing it into those really small squares just to make sure that I could actually do it. Because a lot of people I see, like, they write it really large or they don't really stick to that. I just thought it was just good practice. Sometimes he would have a radical with some strange name, and I would actually rename that into something that I could really personally relate to more. I remember doing this a lot when I did Hasig. He would have some word that I didn't really know. He would name a radical, and it wasn't like, I don't really think it was supposed to be a kanji in the book in itself.
Yeah, you
so
mean
it didn't
like
have
the primitive elements?
Yeah, the primitive elements. I would sometimes give those different names just based on something personal or something that I really liked.
Yeah,
at the time, something I was into. And, because I would look at the keywords and realize, okay, like this thing, I could make a good story if only the keyword was this and not that. So I would just change it to something and I would remember it the whole time. Like I used like Pokemon and like people I knew in real life.
Nice.
like stuff like that. And I know a lot of people don't actually do this, and you might argue that it's not necessary, but it really helped the kanji stick in my memory because, I mean, I never even had my stories on the cards, but it's been almost 4 years now since I did them. And I still remember them, almost all of them. I would write the story by hand. And I think another thing that might be worth doing is checking to see if your story actually works. Like I would cover up the story and I would just look at the keyword. I'm like, okay, can I use my story to pull the kanji out of my memory? And I would try that and see if like I could actually get it to come out. I mean, usually I would be able to write it. And if I couldn't, I would like try to come up with a better story or something like that. And I'd write it multiple times and make sure the stroke order is correct. And then I would go ahead and do it in Anki later. So I would just like do several checks before I actually put it in.
Cool. Yeah, I like that idea of checking, testing your story.
Something that I wish I knew. So there's some websites, I guess, that are useful if you're just starting out. I know that sometimes it can be really troublesome to get to like really build up the vocabulary in the beginning when you don't understand anything. So maybe like instead of reading manga, there are some websites that have anime with Japanese subtitles. And I know that you talk about you want to like really focus on listening because reading is not necessarily listening when you're watching this stuff. But I think in the beginning it can be kind of helpful to get yourself more acquainted to some of these words and stuff and, get into this whole AJATT thing without quitting because it's a little bit more fun than sitting there with manga. And if people want to read manga, that's fine.
Yeah, no, I'm all for anime with subtitles, but I just think you should think of it as reading and not listening. So I think people will do things like they'll read manga for their reading, and then they'll watch anime with subtitles, and then they'll count that as their listening. When in reality, if you're reading the subtitles, it's closer to reading than listening. But I think for getting sentences, it's really great.
Yeah, so like in the beginning, there are these two websites. So there's one called animelon.com, and there's another one called anjsub.com. Which I think they're both the same idea. They have just a bunch of anime. They have some really popular ones on here. They have some, they have like a decent selection of stuff on here. This could be of pretty good use to someone who's just starting out. There's a lot of stuff to choose from and you can just get your senses that way. I should also note what you said that when I was doing the reading and stuff, when I first started, I didn't have the subtitles on either. Yeah, that's probably something I should have mentioned. When I watched anime, I didn't have the subtitles. It'd be completely raw, but I would be reading stuff on the side.
Yeah, I think that although it's a little more stoic, I think that approach is probably the most effective. So, I mean, it's good to, that sounds like I'm contradicting the thing I just said, but I think there is use for the anime with subtitles, but it's also good to not rely on it too much and to do some pure reading and some pure listening, because you don't want to rely too much on anything, because it is a crutch, right? It's anime with subtitles, the two different elements help each other. Hearing the lines being spoken actually helps you read the subtitles, and then reading the subtitles helps you hear what's being spoken. So that's why it's so easy. So it's a really good way to break yourself into the Japanese world. But at the same time, you're not practicing pure listening, and you're not practicing just reading. So if you rely on that too much, then it's like an addiction almost.
Like in the beginning, though, if someone wants to like improve their get some sentences and, just get some more vocabulary and, increase your knowledge on the language, I feel like it would probably be a pretty good choice in the beginning. I wouldn't rely on it after. In fact, I don't really use it anymore, but that would definitely come in handy in the beginning.
Well, you said that you had to delete a bunch of cards, right? What was that about?
Yeah. Well, after I watched your video, I actually started doing this. When I converted kanji, I actually overdid it. Sometimes there would be words that didn't have the kanji. They did have a kanji version. It wouldn't be in kanji when I found it, so I would convert it into kanji. But I overdid that, and it started getting cluttered, and it just started.
You would put everything that could be in kanji into kanji, like kore. Yeah, I started. Made.
I started doing stuff like that. Yeah, and I mean, even some like the animals, like the word for parrot, I would have in like kanji or whatever.
Yeah, wait, I think that's a good idea. I mean, the kore and the made and that stuff doesn't really matter, but like things like the parrot, I would put that in kanji because it might come up somewhere in the real world, and if you're learning it, you might as well get the practice learning how to read it.
I think I have seen it a few times too, but I mean, after a while, I mean, I guess you can kind of see the problem. If you put everything in kanji, some of the things start looking really, I don't know, it just gets cluttered, and it was just really difficult to navigate through, and sometimes you run the risk.
I've never heard of this problem before, but I never really did that either, but I can see how, that could happen if you were too strict about putting everything into kanji.
Yeah, I mean, like anything that could be put in kanji, I would. And this wasn't for everything. I mean, I did that like less than a year ago or something, but I mean, after a while, I kind of just let it go. And I mean, unless I'm really not running an error of kind of messing it up. But I mean, sometimes it would just cause a problem because I look at it and yeah, it'd be completely cluttered or something like that. And yeah,
You'd be like, wait,
just
why is their hiragana mixed into this Chinese sentence?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, kanji can be great if it's all like cluttered together, you can just like read it really quickly and get the meaning. But like in that case, I don't really think it was too good of an idea. When I got them from some novels, it was just a mess to look at, and it was really difficult to get through. Okay, so for media, like for some anime, like I would of course recommend like some of the ones I already talked about. Like I would recommend watching Fate Zero. That was one of my first animes. It's a really good show. It's
difficult for sure, Japanese wise.
Yeah, it's difficult. Yeah, it's difficult, but I mean, it's entertaining for you can still watch it even if you don't understand. And it's got some really good soundtrack. I mean, it's got a good story, and I don't really think it's going to bore you even if you don't really understand anything.
True.
Speaking of that, of course, have to add Attack on Titan onto this list. I mean, for anyone who starts, I'm sure a lot of people probably have already heard of this one, but I remember distinctly doing this when I first started. I didn't understand anything, but it was still really engaging to get through, so I think this one's a really good example of that. You don't want to be falling half asleep.
Stuff that will entertain you even if you don't understand exactly what's happening.
Yeah, so I mean, that one, there's a lot going on. There are a lot of action sequences, and it's not going to bore you. It's like loud. There's a lot of stuff going on, and I remember like for some of the animes I watched, I had to go to the bathroom to like splash my face with cold water because I was about to like fall asleep. I remember like if there's a lot of talking, I mean, yeah, that's totally fine, but in the beginning when none of it's comprehensible, it's going to be it can be a little bit boring, even if it's like plot driven and really heavy with dialogue, and it naturally has a really good story. If you're not going to understand any of it, it can be really boring, and that show is really keeps you interested even if you can't understand anything. It's pretty exciting, so I checked that out. I learned a lot from that one. Same thing with Fate Zero for that matter. Even though it's really hard, Fate Zero, I learned a lot from it because I was just interested in it. I already mentioned Shokugeki no Soma. I was also into Tokyo Ghoul at the time. These are some like mainstream ones, some of them. Yeah. But I was really new to anime in general when I first started this whole thing. So I checked out some of the like the popular ones, and I ended up really liking them. So those two I would recommend. It can keep you interested in stuff like that. Suzumiya Haruhi is pretty good.
The anime,
the anime and the novels. I mean, I'm reading them now. Anyone wants to check them out, then you can. But so for games and stuff, if you want to get some katakana practice, you can play the Pokemon games because the names are all in katakana, and like I think the town names are also in katakana. And I know that they use kanji in the later games, past I think Gen 5 and on. But, anything below that, and you're not going to have kanji, so that's kind of the downside. You're not going to have any kanji. Since Japanese people, it's not going to make it harder without the kanji, because they already know the stuff. But if you're just beginning and you did RTK first, I feel like the kanji would help you, so it has the opposite effect. It's actually kind of hard.
And actually, I would say it's still harder for adult Japanese people to read the pure hiragana. It's doable.
Yeah, but it's going to be really troublesome for someone who's learning Japanese for sure because, there's no kanji, and, if you just finished RTK...
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be pretty totally incomprehensible.
Yeah, I mean, the kanji is going to be... it's going to be an asset to you when you first finish it. It's going to be something that can really help you. And you don't have that in Pokemon unless you're playing the later ones. And even those don't have too much. But it can be really good to read, to really get the reading for katakana in, because... I don't really get too much practice for that.
Yeah, you don't in general. So it tends to be, I think a lot of people, including me, their katakana reading ability is a lot weaker than their hiragana ability.
Yeah, I mean, I read it a lot slower than the other two systems because I don't get as many opportunities to see it.
Yeah, and, I remember I had an insight a while ago watching a Hikakin video where he was reading something out loud, and there was a hiragana word that came up that was like made up or something. It's not something you normally hear. And he just read the whole thing, like some super long katakana word, so fluently. And I realized like, oh, for me, it's not that automatic. I have to kind of sound it out, It's like I can do it. It's not hard, but it's not that instantaneous. Like when I see an English word and I just instantly know how to pronounce it. And that's when I realized like, oh, that's like another hole in my ability that I never was aware of before.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've noticed many times that like, if I've read the same word in katakana before, I'll recognize it the second time, and then it'll be really quick.
It's almost like kanji. It's like you just see a word like toire, and it's like you don't actually even look at the individual characters. Your mind just registers the whole word instantly, just by the look of it.
When it comes to something new, I definitely agree with that. Like if I have never seen the word before, and it's really long, if it's short, then it's not really a problem, but I mean, I'd still say it's definitely my slowest. But I mean, if it's a long word, I'll have to sound it out. And one time I actually had to go back and read it again because I got lost halfway through it.
Yeah, sometimes if you want to activate the English part of your mind so you can tell what word it's supposed to be, you have to like say it out loud. That'll happen to me sometimes.
Yeah, and like sometimes it's not even based off an English word either. I mean, sometimes it'll have some words like that are usually not written in katakana, but are like actually Japanese words. And sometimes it'll take me a second to realize what it is.
Yeah. It's like you have to sound it out and wait for the other part of your brain to make the connection.
So what else was I talking about? So for novels, another one that I read recently was NHK no Yokoso, which was another, like, it's one about like a shut-in. And I really like that one.
Yeah, I love that one.
I mean, it's kind of relatable, but I mean, I didn't drop out of college, but it's relatable.
Yeah, I read that because that was, I think, the first real novel, like non-light novel that I ever read. And so that was like 5 years ago. And I really liked it and enjoyed it. But I reread it like a few months ago, and I didn't realize that he's like doing psychedelics the whole time in the video. And it's like, because I looked it up, magic mushrooms were legal in Japan until 2004, and this book was written in 2003. And so he literally just like orders magic mushrooms off the internet. And it's like,
I think he called them like legal drugs or something in the book, right? I think he said that.
He's saying, he's like, yeah, it's almost as powerful as LSD, but it's legal. And I'm like, no, they're pretty much the same thing. Like, he's tripping balls, and he's like, he writes his exact dosages. And
yeah, and he's like, I was talking to the refrigerator or something. I don't remember what it was. It was like a little while ago.
It was just kind of funny because it's like, I watched the anime before I read the novel. That was why I wanted to read the novel. And the anime I actually watched before I even started learning Japanese. That was just like I had a friend who's like, yo, check out this anime. It's really sick. And I didn't know anything about it. And in the opening scene, all of his furniture is like talking to him, and he's like having a conversation with them. And I thought it was just supposed to be metaphorical, but now I realize, like, oh no, he was like literally tripping balls, and they just turned that into an anime, and I'm like, that's kind of awesome because I'm pretty into psychedelics. I haven't really talked about that, but
yeah, I don't know. I found that pretty cool. So I mean, and he was talking about like how the walls are crawling and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, it's like if you read the descriptions and you've done psychedelics yourself, you can tell he's not making this up. Like, this is based off a real experience.
So yeah, I don't know. That's just a really that's a good read. The only drama that I really remember is this one called Hanayori Dango, whatever. Like
I watched that. Like that was I think the first drama I ever watched when I started AJATTing. I didn't even understand it, so I can't really tell if it was good or not.
It's a pretty popular one as far as I understand, and it's all right. I mean, I enjoyed it. It was watchable. Kind of corny at times, but
yeah, I feel like it was pretty corny.
But I mean, I enjoyed it. I've seen it more than once. I would recommend watching that. So for news, there's a website called news.tbs.co.jp. It has some articles on like a bunch of stuff, politics, whatever. And you can look at whatever you want on there. And the good thing about that is that there is a script to go along with the video for a lot of the articles. You know, I go on there occasionally to get my practice for news and stuff. I'm not really that interested in the news, but I do check it out from time to time. I'd recommend that website. Okay, so another thing that I would also recommend is there's a Japanese to English dictionary called jisho.org or whatever, but there's a classic one before the new one, and I still use that. Even when I'm making cards today, because when you like type a word into the dictionary in Japanese, I think it has to be all in kanji or all in hiragana for it to register.
Yeah.
With all the possible things, and I always put it in hiragana just so you can get everything, just so you can get every result to come up.
Yeah, I do that too.
Like sometimes there are lots of ways, and if you go to classic jisho, like if you type in the word in Japanese, it'll come up with the result, and it'll come up with the reading in only hiragana.
Yeah, you mean even if you type it in with like half kanji, half hiragana, it'll still know what you mean?
I'm not really sure about that, but I mean, if you paste the word in, I know you're thinking, why can't you just paste the word in, like, if you already have it? It comes up with like the meaning and stuff, which is not something you're really interested in if you're doing monolingual, but then you can just copy and paste the reading. And I feel like just having that there is pretty useful. You can just put that right into the Japanese dictionary, and it'll come up, because some of the kanji have some of the words have like multiple ways you can write them and stuff like that. I just copy and paste that whole thing in just so I don't miss anything.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you're like still
I'm not really good at explaining this. I still occasionally do it if I want to just get all the possible results up. Because sometimes I type it in wrong in Culver or whatever, and it doesn't really, like, the whole thing doesn't come up unless you're like all in hiragana or all in kanji. Yeah, and sometimes when you find it in a book or something, you might not use all the kanji. Like, it might have like one thing written in kanji and the other part of the word not written in kanji. I've had that a few times.
Yeah.
There's that. I already talked about JED. I mean, that's useful in the beginning. I don't really know too many good dictionaries that are Japanese to English for iOS, but I don't know. I'm sure there's something out there. And I just remembered the last thing I want to give for tips is I've had this problem a lot of times when I first started. I made a My Anime list. And so, I mean, I started getting obsessed with statistics. Like, I started seeing how much I like how much I was actually watching and stuff, it tends to make you want to finish every show you start.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Just to get your number up. You think, wow, I'm going up in number, I must be getting really good, or I have to get, like, well, I've watched 10 days of shows, but, I think the most important part here is, like, especially in the beginning, is that you actually like the stuff you're looking at. I've had this many times, and it took me forever to actually finally listen to my mind. My mind was telling me, no, I don't want to watch this anymore. Like, I get this feeling like I want to drop the show halfway through, but I'm like, no, I have to finish it. So then, I would just force myself to finish a show, even though I didn't want to watch it, because I couldn't start a new show until
I'm guilty of that too. It's a really toxic mentality.
It took me forever to finally get to this point where I'm like, okay, no. If I'm like a few episodes in, I start getting, I just get this feeling like I should drop it. I just go ahead and drop it. It's not I don't really think it's worth pushing yourself to finish something that you don't want to watch just because. And that was just something I was guilty of for a long time. I would be sitting there. I was like, okay, great. I have to watch 8 more episodes before I can finally choose something else. And when I choose something else, I've got to be really careful to choose something that's not going to bore me.
It's a lot easier said than done, but I agree with that advice totally. It's hard to actually follow like your instinct and just turn it off, because it feels so dirty almost to like drop something midway through. But I think it's worth getting over that kind of mental block.
Yeah, and so, I mean, this thing can be good to, like, keep track of how much you've been watching, but it's also, like, it's a double-edged sword. It's a mono no tsurugi, because, like,
But wait, on Mal, you can still add dropped shows and have them count, pretty sure.
Yeah, you can drop them, but the problem is, like, I started getting...
Still doesn't look as good.
Like, finishing, I mean, it starts looking like, it looks like you're not a completionist, but I feel like, again, if I'm going to recommend one thing, I'd say don't be a completionist. Just, if you're feeling like maybe I should drop this, maybe you should just do it. Don't feel like you have to finish everything you watch. Don't feel like you have to finish everything you start reading too. I also had this problem with books. I wouldn't start a new book until I completely finished the other one. And if I stopped halfway, I'd feel really guilty. If there's something else you could be doing that you're going to enjoy more, you should probably just do it. Just get rid of it. So, I mean, now my new mentality is the moment I even think about stopping, like at the moment I get that impression, like I'm not that interested, maybe I shouldn't continue, I just don't continue.
Oh, I came to that same conclusion. The first time I start to wonder if maybe I should drop it is when I have to drop it. Because, like, if I already had the thought, maybe I should stop this, it's already too late, you've been spoiled already.
Yeah, because, I mean, it's really easy to not follow that, because sometimes you're like, well, maybe it'll get good. I've heard the show's getting good later. And you're like, well, maybe I'll actually want to get it. And plus, I've heard so much about this one specific show. Like maybe it's actually that good. Like especially when you're watching a show that has really high rating and you're thinking, maybe I should like this too. So, because it has a really high rating, maybe I'm just missing the whole point and maybe it'll get good. So
yeah, it's easy to get lost in those loops of the mind.
Yeah, so I'd say just, do what you want to do. That pretty much leads me to my final point, which is just have a list of things you want to do. You have to keep looking for new things because you don't want to waste any time. You have to like come up with things that you want to watch ahead of time. And so that you're not just rushing to find something when you find out that you're not into something that you chose. I find like have a few options open, have a bunch of things available. Don't only like download one thing and then find out, well, great, I've got to wait to find something else, or I don't have the book I want to read now, so I'll have to wait and do something else. So I feel like just have a lot of things ahead of time.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
And just keep looking throughout. I mean, this kind of happens naturally anyway. I found a bunch of things that I wanted to just off of other things I looked at. But
yeah, I've always had like an infinitely long list of things I wanted to do to the point where I'll never finish it. But in terms of shows I want to watch and books I want to read.
Yeah, but same thing, right? I mean, like when it comes to watching things and whether or not you should drop it, I mean, if you're trying to be a completionist, there's too much out there for you to ever watch anyway. So just,
yeah, exactly.
Like you're not going to read every book out there and you're not going to watch every show. So you might as well just not force yourself to do it just for that sake. I've dropped a bunch of things recently. Yeah, that's
cool.
Basically it. I don't know if there's anything else I kind of missed out on, but this is getting a little bit long here.
Yeah, no, I think this was really good. This was really useful. It was always fun to hear the journey of someone who made it work. I think the biggest takeaway is just how single pointed you are in the whole bulk of your journey. You were never conflicted, like wanting to do other things, but then feeling like you should do Japanese. It was just all Japanese all the time.
Yeah, and I mean, well, this is the Japanese childhood that you never had. So
yeah,
I mean, that's how we would put it. And I feel like, okay, I mean, this is kind of not really something good to say. I know a lot of people don't want to hear this, but I feel like if you have doubts about it, then it's probably not going to work out. And I feel like if you're not going to take it all the way to the end, then it's not worth starting at all. You want to use this as a tool and be able to do things. And if you're just going to do it as kind of like a part-time hobby instead of a lifestyle, that nothing will ever come out of it, and you'll just end up quitting and wasting all that time.
Yeah, well, you're preaching to the gospel with that regard to that point. Yeah, well, thanks so much for joining me.
No problem.
Maybe if in a few years when you're even better, can make an update.
Yeah, I probably should make some updates. I actually never made any update videos, but
no, I mean I can come make the update for you. I can come interview you again.
It'd be pretty cool. Yeah,
sounds good.
I mean, yeah, I'm still going with it, still going strong. Still haven't lost any motivation for it, so I'll still be here. If you ever wonder like what I'm up to, you can just say all Japanese all the time.
Sweet. Okay. Well, talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
See you, Matt.
See ya.